about today, or the presentation that I have today, is basically going to be on the basis of how we as creatives have been romanticizing the broke artist. And this is one of the things I try to teach on the first thing in my workshops, and especially now moving into the business side of poetry, right? So, the whole purpose of this exercise is to help us understand why we are romanticizing the broke artist, and then what are the steps and the precautions that we can take in order to unromanticize the broke artist. And then for this illustration, I will be going through explanations and stories, right? So I think the first thing that we need to do is we need to understand what romanticism is, right? So romanticism is describing things in a way that makes them sound more exciting or mysterious than they are, meaning that when we look at poetry in its essence, it's a very, very exciting genre in sport, to a point where when you introduce yourself, people are always like, oh, you're a poet? That must be fantastic. So you write about emotions and stuff. And I want to, as a facilitator, I want us to unlearn some of the things, or some of the misconceptions, or mysteries that the community has when it comes to us, in terms of our writing, in terms of how we do our work, and also just in terms of how we want to articulate our own creativity, in a sense that it's not just always about emotions and stuff, as I mentioned in this presentation, right? So another misconception that people might have is that you must be really good with words. I'm sure you can write a poem in an hour. And clearly, as me and Marsha were talking off air, she was basically saying that the way she's like so focused on work, in a sense that inspiration comes and goes at the same time. So we need to have that ability to harness that inspiration, where we have like a moment of inspiration and just jot ideas and write ideas down. But however, we do not have the time to actually work on our craftsmanship to the point where creativity just naturally flows, right? So this is some of the misconceptions that I want to tear down as we move along in this workshop. So I think another thing that we can also try to articulate, or where we want to try and understand, is that where did it actually start, right? So I think for me, a great example, it started with gatekeepers. Gatekeepers, in a sense that in the olden days, you had curators and gallery owners. That's where I want to start. So this is where now isms are formed. I don't know how familiar you guys are with isms, right? Cubism, Impressionism, Dadaism, all of these art movements were a rebellion against a certain type of art movement. And then you had the Renaissance, which was removing religion from art in its essence, right? So the first type of gatekeepers that I sort of identified are curators and gallery owners. This was when the Medici family also owned a lot of artworks. You know, they had people who were curating their art in order to go into art galleries, right? And also, an art gallery was based on the ism that the time, or the time it was in. So if you were an a Renaissance artist, your Cubism work would not be allowed because it's not in its time. So I think also we want to be cognizant of that. That time also plays, or the society that we live in plays a different type of format in how we actually articulate our art. And then the second thing, which is a bit more modern, right, is society and government. Society tells us that you are a poet, and all you do, you just can get on stage and share your emotions and get off stage, right? And we need to also unlearn the presentation that society has given us, right? So, and also society will tell you that you can only do one type of poetry. You can only just write books and publish. You can't do production. You can't be an organizer. You can't be a platform creator for poetry, right? So society tends to box you in, right? And the second thing that I want to articulate in this second segment is the government. Our government plays such a huge role in us actually articulating our artwork, because there are no funding for for artists or mobility funds for artists in order to learn and go out there and learn more about the type of art that we create, not only in the world but also in South Africa, right? We do not have a sense of real documentation of what is actually happening in our country in terms of our poetry. This one time I was in a conversation with a lady from Spain. She came down to our organization, and then she was just like, in order to find out what is happening in a country, you need to find out what people are saying or what people are writing about within the country, mainly poetry. So poetry is a form of documentation. And then the other thing that is gatekeeping us is the industry in itself. The industry in itself is not diverse. It has no inverted commas system. So we now have to create our own system within the industry. So if you are a poet, let's say you are Jabulani from Epinar. So how do you learn, number one, how to write poetry? And number two, how do you learn or where do you go and perform your poetry? And number three is that what other distribution platforms can you place your poetry in the format of documentation, your own work, so that you actually make a living out of it. And the last thing, which is how do you actually make money from poetry? So the industry in itself is also a gatekeeper because there are no systems that are in place. So also with the with the copyright system that it's in place, they say that you must change 80% of your work. But however, a Jabulani does not know that. He thinks he's creating his own thing, and then when it comes to form, they say, no, Jabulani, you literally said 2 or 3 lines that someone else said. So how do we actually get to a point where we understand our own industry in its essence in order to articulate what we are doing in terms of our creative format, which is poetry? And the last thing, which might hurt, is that you are also a gatekeeper. You are also a gatekeeper in the sense that you are not willing to go out there and find out more for yourself, right? And the second thing is that you as a person, or also as creatives in general, we do not find a lot of self-worth within ourselves in order to feel like we are doing something good, that is called imposter syndrome, where we feel like we are not worthy of opportunities, right? So I want you guys to understand that there are a number of gatekeepers, but then the biggest gatekeeper here is you. So I want to tell you guys a story. And the story is, the scientists made an experiment, and this experiment was that they put a frog in normal cold water, right? So as they putting this frog in normal cold water, they increased the temperature, or every 5 minutes, right? For this frog to probably eventually jump out, right? So what the frog then did is that the frog adjusted its temperature according to how hot it was, right? So let's say it was at 10 degrees and 30 degrees. The frog adjusted its body temperature as well according to the water, to a point where the frog actually exploded, right? So this is a story on complacency. How we as artists or creatives tend to be in one place in this hot boiling water, where we fail to understand our industry in itself, right? Or we just thinking in a one perspective dimension, where we think, I'm a poet, I deserve an opportunity, right? So you're deserving of an opportunity. The temperature increases. Your entitlement to you being on stage, the temperature increases. Your entitlement to not being able to research about the business side of poetry, the temperature increases, right? To a point where you are going to literally, sorry, this might be dark, die while no one actually knows who you are and your work. So I want you guys to understand that we also put in ourselves in a position where we become so complacent and we become so entitled to a point where we literally explode. And the second story I want to tell you guys is the um, monkey ladder banana story. So scientists once again put monkeys in an experiment, whereas four monkeys in an experiment, whereas they tried to get to the bananas. So when one monkey climbed up, in order to stop the monkey from getting the bananas, the rest of the other monkeys were spilled with water, including the monkey that tried to climb up, right? And every time a new monkey was added, the same sort of repetitive system was added. So no monkey could actually get to the bananas because of what happened to the other monkeys, right? So every time they put a new monkey, to the point where there were like 7 or 8 monkeys, right? The monkeys that were spilled with water in the beginning climbed up also to stop this new monkey from climbing up this ladder, right? So this story is talking about how, as society or as the poetry community, we are literally digging our own hole, in terms of we are not trying to reach the goals of becoming the first poetry millionaire, becoming the first, becoming the first person to break barriers within the poetry industry, right? We're always trying to drag people down because of how we also got splashed with water, right? So this also once again is correlated to a little bit of complacency as well. But also society tells us that no, you can't reach that banana because um, 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 a poet in South Africa is not supposed to sell more than 1,000 copies. And that is true, by the way, until Koleka Putuma came and she literally killed the whole industry. So what I'm trying to say here in the story is that let us unlearn the type of systems or the type of barriers that we have created amongst ourselves within the poetry industry, that a poet is supposed to be only on stage and that's what they do for the rest of their life. Look, we are in a pandemic and literally no one or no poet is actually coming up with new innovative ways in order to help them sustain their craftsmanship, other than, unless obviously if you have like a book or something dope like that. So what I'm trying to say is that as we grow into our industry in business, also we must learn how to diversify. The next story I want to tell is the story of Vincent van Gogh, or however you say it. He's not my brother or anything. So this man died broke with depression slash bipolar, but his work is worth millions, right? And I'm sure it sounds very familiar to most of us. It's like a musician dying without owning their masters or royalties, which is something that you and I will need to start having this conversation about, is that the copyright stuff, like what actually belongs to you. How do you actually get to a point where you own your masters in terms of your craftsmanship in poetry, and how do you get a contract where you own your own material, because publishers, they come to you and they're like, look, we'll give you a 3% deal, the 97% is ours, and you get to keep this amount. But what they don't tell you is that they own your work. So that's another thing that we're going to be talking about, right? And another thing that we've heard is that you are famous, well known, but the bank account is not popping. And then this is what I am trying to reiterate, is that in as much as you are well known or not known, your bank account at the end of this should be popping. So why do artists fail to make bucket loads of money? As you can see, my slide is quite blurry because it's a conversation that we are not having as creatives. So these are some of the things I've tried to figure out why we are not making bucket loads of money, and these are 5 points. And the first point I'm trying to make is that we are in a point of creating the creating mentality. Like, our mentality is like, oh my gosh, I just want to create the whole time, I just want to sit on the beach and find inspiration somewhere. We want to be always drinking coffee with blue cheese, right? But that's also something that is going to hinder us from actually becoming more creative or articulating what we do, right? So this also is a barrier. This is also the reason why I asked you guys to do like a a process where you understand your process, right? So that you are not consistently stuck in the creating mentality, where you just dig yourself in that hole, right? So that's the first perception, that I think creatives are not making money. They just want to chill and not do anything, other than have inspiration every day. The second thing I want to tell you guys is that they want everything to be done for them, including admin, right? Administration is so important in terms of business, and also it's so important in terms of like your career, because this in its essence is also a business. So you need to register your work. That book that you have somewhere, you need to put a title to it and register it, right? Whatever you post on social media, make sure that it's copyrighted. But that's also a conversation that we can have another day. But I want you guys to be cognizant that artists want everything to be done for them. The other thing that I want to reiterate is that some if most do not have an understanding of what business is, or how the things that they do add value to them, so they do not understand how a poem, when they share a poem on stage, what ramifications that poem has in order to heal the next person, right? So we must be able to understand our worth and our value in terms of our creative resourcing. And the other thing I want to reiterate is that, oh, my meeting is running out of time. I think it's going to stop. Has it stopped yet? Just let me know. And then the last thing I'm going to say is that artists or creatives do not have a creative labor, or they do not have a process. So this is so important, that we understand our creative labor, what inspires us, what do we actually do, what environments do we go in to get inspired, and hence why we always need to document our process, right? So I just felt like, in order for us to actually set a milestone in terms of how we need to reiterate the unromanticizing of the broke artist, we need to understand actually what happens in our minds, or how we need to change our thinking in order for us to articulate what we actually supposed to articulate, which is, let's make money at the end of the 8 weeks, right? Or at least let's start the process of understanding what we can do, or what we can do in order to start the process of creating labor, or the creative labor, or what we can do to in order to start to find out what actually happens in our industry, and not let ourselves be too deep to a point of like, oh, I'm just writing about my emotions, and then that's just it, and then that's always going to end there. It's just going to end up on a paper, and it's just going to end up on your deathbed. So I want you guys to understand that the romanticizing of the broke artists actually starts with our mentalities. We need to unlearn what we have learned, and we need to relearn the way that other industries learn their own industry. So I borrow a lot from the musical industry, because I've got friends who are musicians, and they tell me all of these beautiful things, and then hence why I am able to articulate actually what we can do as a poetry industry, and number two, as a poetry community, where everything is just like about emotions, and all about like what life is, and that free spiritedness, but also that free spiritedness also comes at a cost. So we need to do what it do, you know. So yeah, I just thought I should end it off there. And yeah, do you guys have any questions?